Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Director of Webinars for Tech Channel, and I'd like to welcome you to our presentation, IBM Power, Disaster Recovery That Won't Break the Bank. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but feel free to ask a question or submit a comment at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. Also, be sure to check out event resources. You'll either find that on the left side of your screen or at the bottom of your screen. There you will find additional assets related to today's topic. So click on the drop-down menu, select the ones you're interested in, and know that you can download those right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Racksquared Data Centers. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jason Hardy, Vice President and General Manager at Racksquared, to introduce our panel and kick things off. So Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Janine. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I am the General Manager with Racksquared Data Centers. And for those of you not familiar with us, we're a full-service data center that's headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. And we specialize in delivering fully managed solutions to the IBM Power community. I talk to a lot of companies, and one of the recurring challenges I see from them is finding a cost-effective DR solution for their IBM Power platform. Today, what we're going to talk about is DR options that range from, build it myself, I'm a do-it-yourself, or I want to do it in-house, all the way up to, doing a fully managed outsourced solution and what you should be looking for out of a provider. Joining me today are Josh Grable, who is Racksquared's Manager of Data Center Operations, and DJ Singley of MapSys. DJ is our IBM business partner and the guy I turn to when I need access to hardware or expertise around the IBM Power platform. With that, Josh, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, then we'll have DJ follow you and do the same.
Sure. As mentioned, my name is Joshua Grable, Operations Manager here at Racksquared Data Centers. My background's about 25 years now of operational experience in the IT field. DJ?
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, folks, I'm DJ Singley. I work at MapSys, a national IT consulting firm. I'm the executive director there, responsible for system sales and architecture. So I'm really excited to be here and chat with you today.
Thanks, guys. Definitely looking forward to getting into the conversation here. So with that, let's just jump right into a little background here. I don't think any of this undeniable. The IBM Power platform, been around for 30 years. Lots of companies running mission critical applications on it, primarily because it's always been known for its reliability and resiliency. People know they can count on it to run their business. Despite that great reputation, we all know that, it's hardware. Sooner or later, hardware and technology are going to fail. So let's just kick it off real quick. DJ, you've been in the industry for a long time. Can you talk about, what do you see around this platform? Where do the failures happen?
Yeah, certainly. It'd be my pleasure, for sure. For those who don't know, I used to be a designer with IBM. That's right. About 20 years ago, man, I'm dating myself now. I was a processor designer with the Power 5 and Power 6 and Power 7 teams. So this topic is near dear to my heart. I would like to tell you all that this stuff never fails. Of course it doesn't. This is IBM, and it's just the best in the world. And we all know that it's really good. In fact, the last 15 years or so, the ITIC study typically defines the IBM Power platform as the most reliable on the planet, along with the mainframe platform, right? IBM mainframe, and all the other x86 platforms trail behind. However, failures do happen, and they absolutely do. And I've seen a lot throughout my time in Powerland, so to speak. So let me take you through a couple of them that are my favorite. All right? One of them I can finally remember at a larger hospital, bought an enterprise-grade machine. The enterprise-grade machines, they have dual clock cards and dual service processors, right? You'd think that, nothing can take this thing down, right? Well, something happened. The thing went bump in the middle of the night, and they had to rely on their DR strategy to get them going. One of the clock cards died, and the machine was taken down. Everything went down, and it was sort of a tragedy. They didn't know what to do. They were down for hours. What they didn't know is that if they called IBM support, IBM would have said, hey, listen, just boot up the machine. It's going to be fine. It's going to re-IPL itself, and you'll be back in business. Didn't know that. So Well, that's one very interesting case of failure, hardware failure. One of them, right? Another one of my favorites is when a customer, their prized machine, it was a smaller customer where they were sitting on a floor somewhere in the building, and they had a drywall team come in and they drywalled over it. They couldn't even find this machine for months until one of the fans failed. It was in a small little space and the fan failed. And they're like, where does the machine? Where is it? They couldn't figure it out. They eventually found an Ethernet cable running underneath a piece of drywall and punched a hole, and lo and behold, there it is. But things with IBM Power hardware aren't the only things that could fail, right? You could also have failures in your SAN. Some of the worst failures that you could take a look at are, an entire control enclosure taking a failure, a customer touring your data center, puts their cup of coffee on top of the SAN, doesn't realize it. They shouldn't do that, by the way. And also things like software failures or firmware code loads, things like that could take your environment down. So again, guys, I've seen it all. And if you don't have a DR strategy or DR plan, and I'm sure Josh will agree with me, you probably should start thinking about it. And we're the folks here to help you with that. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, a few other things. I mean, I'm thinking about from the hardware stance that you mentioned. I've had customers come in with an issue where they actually lost 2 drives in the same array set, which ended up killing their DASD. Other situations, again, you also have in the back, you got multiple cards out there. If you have a single fiber channel or a single SAS card, non-redundant, or even it's redundant in the card, if that card goes bad, you just lost your storage to your device. Other pieces even to consider outside of the hardware failures. I mean, think about where your box is sitting. If the networking were to go down, any type of manual job, if someone was to take a vacation, take some time off, and that someone's designed to do the backups every night and forgot to load the tape. Therefore, next morning the 400 just stuck sitting there waiting for a message to be answered about a missing tape. Those little things can also cause outages and problems. Denial of service attacks. If you have many customers have internet-facing boxes out there on the web. Bad coding is another one where someone does some custom apps, messes up the boot sequence. Deleting the wrong items. One of my favorites is I see is where people have the IFS mounted to their Windows operating system, and they get some sort of virus or crypto locker across their entire IFS because of that Windows access. It all can cause problems, help to bring you down.
So some great examples, guys. Being in the data center business, I talk to customers all the time or prospects all the time about how we're set up, and I always say it's hardware. We know it's going to fail sooner or later. Something's going to fail, and the key is having a plan. From our perspective at the data center, it's how do we self-heal, how do we route around it and make sure customers never see it. From your perspective, where you can't get real-time recovery, it is how quickly can I recover. So it's going to happen. The key is how do you quickly recover, and that gets into developing that DR strategy. And we talked to a lot of people that have different challenges with why they don't have a DR plan or they don't have a really thorough one. DJ, why is DR such a struggle for people?
Yeah, well, I think for most people, it's very much overwhelming to them, right? Where do they start? Who do they talk to? How do they even begin this, this journey? And that can be quite paralyzing, I think. Besides the overwhelming nature of what to do, how to do it, and who even to talk to, you have to understand that most people have this perception, at least, that it can be very, very expensive, and certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be necessarily. And we'll go over some ways to keep the expense down, or at least to define your expenses a little bit later, I'm sure. A lot of folks view this as an insurance policy or something that comes up from on high. The C-level says you must have a DR and HA plan. You must tick this box. And if you don't, we're going to be in trouble. And they don't really give it enough of a thought. But I think if you kind of get out of the idea of its insurance, and it really is a critical part of your business and business continuity plans, then I think you can see the path to viable DR strategies and high availability strategies. I do want to mention one quick thing here too. I think that this is probably a unique way of looking at things. think a lot of folks, when they look at cloud providers, they skim over it, or if you ask 100 different people, you're going to get 100 different explanation of what a cloud is. I put cloud providers into two distinct categories: full service and self-service. The self-service, again, that's where you get overwhelmed and you don't understand where you're going, and it could be expensive and variable cost. Could be a viable alternative. However, full service clouds like Racksquared, I think, are really where it's at. And that means that you get that domain knowledge of DR and HA with these folks all the time. So you aren't struggling all the time figuring out your DR and HA plans. So that's something I talk to my customers about a lot, because it's important. I think you need a partner, you need help figuring this stuff out, and folks like Racksquared are great doing it. So Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think of a lot of problems I see in the workplace right now is the teams are getting smaller, asked to do more, and they're doing enough just to get by on a day-to-day basis. A lot of times there's things things to think about if you're going to do DR and recovery. Is your hardware getting too old? I mean, a lot of questions come up to this. Go back to, I might have, say, a lot of customers might keep an old box around to recover from, but realize when you upgrade to a certain level, that old box may no longer come in play. For the falling back from a disaster. Small teams tend to focus on fires and not strategy. So what are we going to do to free up and get DR out there? Another thing that I always worry about again is your OS so far out of date? Then say it's your only box, can you even move forward to somewhere new? That's the other thing you might want to consider, because you also think about your applications. Can applications be moved to a newer version of the OS? Licensing is something to consider during DR. And the reason importance of the plan is to have all this at least outlined and thought about, because again, it seems like these disasters always seem to happen at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, never 8 a.m. on a Monday. So you're going to get all the best support and all the technology available to you. No, you really have to think about some of these things in the middle of the night.
Josh, I'm glad you brought that up, that whole idea of the outdated OS. Right, there's a lot of customers out there with OSs that are no longer supported. However, they have critical business infrastructure and applications on there that just can't be upgraded for some reason. And a lot of those folks generally feel stuck. Again, overwhelmed. What am I going to do with this? Well, at Racksquared, you can support older OSs, and keep that alive until they can upgrade their applications or their OSs, and they should be keeping up. But there's a lot of folks out there who are just having struggles with that, right, Josh?
Yeah, one of the neat things I run into with a lot of customers, which it's very surprising, a lot of these homegrown apps that are sitting out there. So we get customers, they're still running, 7.1 or 5.3 or 5.4 of the older OSs, and they can literally forklift their applications, put on a new box, and get them up and running. And something they didn't think they could do without someone there to help them out and make sure they can actually go from point A to point B and have that testing available to them versus trying to do it on their own, swing from their fence. And there's others again who they go even from that point where we lay them a basic foundation, or they go out, get a new box, and they simply forklift the app and put on a new one to get on supported hardware and software.
Right. I think it's probably important to also note to everyone out there that if you're running an unsupported OS from IBM, that all support from you folks is best effort, of course, right? You can't rewrite the OS for you, but I think that's such a valuable service to bring forward. And there's a lot of folks out there that are stuck, and we have no other places to turn, right? You folks at Racksquared are always there and can come through in a pinch with some truly unique solutions, I think. So, pretty great.
Yeah, DJ, you touched on DR as an insurance policy, and one of the consistent themes that we see, and I actually just had a conversation today with a customer, is the whole idea of trying to build a business case around DR. That the goal is you never need it, and therefore you're just spend. So the payoff at the end is always hard to quantify. How do you quantify what it's going to save you when it could be a year before you need that program? It could be 10 years before you may never need it. The goal is, again, that you never need it. But for the guy I was talking to, our typical contact is an IT person. And when you're talking to IT about DR, you're preaching to the crowd. But that IT guy has to go back to typically a business manager and sell this concept to them and get their buy-in. And one of the things that we run into frequently is they struggle with quantifying what they really need. So there's a price, but what are they really getting in terms of the DR plan? How quickly does it work? Things along those lines. So the next question kind of delves into that, DJ. You've decided you need a DR plan. What are the critical items you need to think about right up front?
Oh boy. Well, this is like the very basic question, right? This is the time when you get to sit down with a client and talk to them, talk to their entire C-suite about the three circles, as I like to call them, right? The recovery time objective, which is the time that it takes to bring your environment back up should you declare a disaster. The recovery point objective, which is how much data or services have you lost during that outage. And then finally, the recovery cost objective, which Jason always reminds me of this one. It's probably the most important for almost all these businesses considering DR and HA. And when those circles align, you find your solution in the middle, where you're going to fit, what kind of DR and HA you should be considering and planning for. And again, this is the very basic conversation that any business should have on what they expect for their service level agreements or SLAs during a disaster or a high availability event. So again, you guys need to sit down. The entire team needs to sit down and come up with answers to those three questions. And only then can we start deciding, where to go next with the DR plans. And just remember, there is absolutely a trade-off to, hey guys, the answer is always as soon as possible, as soon as possible, as soon as possible. Well, okay, well, you're going to see the trade-off on that. Sometimes the cost is going to be a little bit higher for as soon as possible. So come up with realistic objectives first and then go for it. Now, I know Josh has an amazing operations view on this. And so Josh, what do you think about this?
Yeah. When I'm planning and working with anybody, internal, external, think about your customer. I always bring up the emphasis of testing. You always want to keep test. The reason behind all the testing is you can start answering the RTO, RPO, RCO and go, as I go through these, where's your plan? What is your plan? Do we have a plan? Do we have it located somewhere? Is it available? We start working through the plan. We can start figuring out, well, if we do process X, it may take 4 hours. But if we do process Y, it may take 5 minutes. But X may cost 10, 20, 30 times the cost of doing Y. So as you go through and develop those plans, you can actually start getting an understanding of what it's going to take to do it. Now, when you go through the whole planning phase and process, you have to think about multiple things. And I know a lot of people, when they start thinking about DR, can kind of get paralyzed by this thought and fear of, there's just so much to consider. I view it as the elephant. You start chomping away at that sucker and start breaking away the pieces. And I go through, once you have your plan, you define a plan. But the important part is, what are you planning for? And sometimes you can take it in small steps. Don't plan for everything. Are you planning for the loss of an application? Are you planning for the loss of the server itself? Are you planning for the loss of the building? And all those scenarios can have different plans that come together to form the whole plan, where you go through your script and you pretty much pick, this is the path. If then I'm going to go down this and go through and determine that. You may have a broken server, but you don't have a building that burned to the earth. So the networking conversation may be off the table in terms of developing that. So there are pieces always to consider when planning. Most people don't think about it. It's like, do you have licensing? You got a new box to restore on, but the serial number changed. Do you have that planned out? Have you thought about that? How are you going to get to your DR environment? Is it the tape in the building that burned down, or you're releasing some space in an empty rack with the boxes turned off? How's the tape going to get in it? The other thing that you think about, communications plans, your internal and external during the disaster. How do users, consumers, think about those? Administrators continue to communicate with your application services. But in the end, think about how long can you be down, and does the testing, even if it's a bad test, you go, Josh, this took 16 hours. We can only be down for 4. We have a starting point, and that's where you should go and help develop your plan. So I always want to make sure people don't feel overwhelmed with a DR plan and try to plan for every scenario. Plan for a scenario and work off of that.
Yeah, Josh, you always talk about test. That's one thing I learned from you all the time, is to mention test to every one of my customers, because that is really, really important. But you also mentioned the networking piece, and I really like that. And I want to just emphasize that again, is that working with Racksquared, the networking is typically a very again, a very hard thing to figure out for customers, and they don't understand what to do, especially during a disaster. The adrenaline's running high.
Mhm.
How do you figure that out? And you guys take care of all that for our customers, which is an incredible service in and of itself. Additionally, there is no egress fee charges, which a lot of other, especially the self-service clouds, think the big ones, they charge you for every byte that leaves that data center. So the easy button is certainly Racksquared, I think, when it comes to this. I think you'd agree, right?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to the networking piece, that's the expertise to help you out in those pieces and plan for your future. It really does you no good to have an equivalent of your safety island in the middle of the Caribbean where you can go hide if you don't have a boat. If there's no way to get to your DR site, what's the point of having it? So always bring up a lot of people and forgetting about networking and going back to, I've got a replica of a server in the cloud, and go, but I haven't set up any VPN tunnels. Or one of the other ones to consider is too, if you have multiple sites, maybe only your corporate headquarters is the one connecting to it, and all the remote sites go through it for DR. What happens if you lose corporate? Just many things to think about that we could definitely help with, and with the planning, and start asking questions that you may not think about until they come up. So we try to always get ahead of that, bring up the testing. Test.
That's love it. I think the Caribbean island comment was for me, right? I'm actually sitting in Jamaica right now at an IBM event. So don't hate me, folks. Don't hate me.
It's hard, DJ. It's hard not
I
to.
know.
So with the test comment, I see some questions coming in, and I was planning on talking about a couple customers real quick that this plays into. And the question was around, how often do you allow testing? And it really varies by what the customer wants to do. And it's an interesting thing with DR. We have some customers that I think knowing they've got DR infrastructure in the data center is such a relief to them that they don't bother with testing because they feel like they're done. And it's just a relief to know they have somewhere to go, but they haven't really worked through the plan and gotten to where they need to be. We have a large energy company out of Mexico that they've got their entire environment replicated to us, and they test multiple times a year to make sure they're in an earthquake zone. If they get hit, they need to know they can recover. When we first started working with them, we had a very extensive test period with them that we spent hours and hours to go through the first scenario. After that, when we did another test, a couple weeks later, the window was much shorter. We did another one and it was much shorter. As this was progressing, they're making notes, we're making notes, so that each side knew during an event, here's what we're each responsible for. So it created a plan for them. And as we've done it, they've been with us for going on 4 years now. Now, when they do a test, it's something that, it fails over quickly. They can run on it for 24, 48 hours. And, there's not all the effort that went into those first tests. So the testing just really helps them fine tune it. Another very small customer that we have, we did the testing with them, and what they walked away with from that, their comment was, we didn't expect a playbook to come out of this. But as long as we're doing the test, document what's going on. And it creates a great opportunity to, if you're overwhelmed with how do I create a plan, let's do a test. And you're going to get, at least the skeleton of a plan out of that, and you can start filling in the blanks. So, testing is really at the customer's discretion. How often do you want to test? And, how quickly do you need it to come back up? What kind of recovery time objective do you have? We work with each customer and can fine tune different solutions to different recovery time objective windows. And, DJ kind of hit on that with recovery cost objective, that there's a trade-off. The faster you want to come back, the more expensive the tools are, and the more work you need to do up front. But it's something that, testing is just so important to making sure that, when things are going sideways, you're ready to go. So,
and Jason, add on to that note, one thing I'd like to mention, and with many of my customers, those who don't test, and this is why I like to tell anybody I'm working with, is I can promise you a beautiful operating system. I can't promise you your application is going to work. Each one of these environments, I tell people, is their fingerprints, they're the snowflakes, however you want to view them. They're unique. Each customer uses the iSeries in a different manner. The problem is, your operating system, how it's going to, the operating system application, how it's going to start up, what things should run. even as a service provider, I don't know the ins and outs of how that box should function. And that's why it's important to test. And we emphasize working with the customers that if we do this, we'll never, I say Murphy's Law, we test it out and get it down, we'll never need it. We don't test, we're going to need it. For some reason, it always seems to come out that way. So I always put the emphasis on that, make sure you understand that, again, finding an RTO, from our stance, it can be really easy if all we're doing is bringing up your operating system. That can be minutes. But if you really want to find out if things are going to work, that's where the testing comes in. That's why it's important. You have a beautiful operating system in the cloud that nobody can get to. Did that really buy anything? Test, figure out the networking, get everything moving forward.
Yep, great. DJ, so moving on. You're the hardware guy. I've got my checkbook out. I'm ready to start buying. Walk me through it. What do I need to purchase if I want to do this myself?
Yeah, this is a long conversation, guys. How long do we got here? I'll take you through it really quick. Okay, replication hardware and software. Let's start with hardware. Well, listen. First off, if you haven't figured this out, you're going to need 2 of everything. That means data centers as well, or in some of our customers' cases, data closets. Hopefully, there's a lock on the door and it has good ventilation. So that's like the bare minimum right there. So 2 places to put this stuff. Then you need 2 power systems, right? Their production power system, hopefully is under support, and your secondary power system, your HRDR power system, that again, hopefully is under support. After the hardware, actually, before I exit the hardware, I should also mention if you're using SANs, which I think you probably should, and I'll review that in just a second, you'll have to have a second SAN as well. IBM SANs are particularly easy to work with. You can have mismatching SANs at the production and mismatching SANs at the DR site. So that would work. As far as software goes, you'll need some kind of replication layer. QEDD, Mimics, those are both very popular ways of doing HA and DR. However, they are not automated failover, right? This is something you're going to have to declare the disaster and go do it yourself. Great tools, they're expensive. We have other tools that will do automated failover and work really well with SANs. In fact, have a superior method of operation with a SAN. I won't go into all the ins and outs, but it is much better, and that is Power HA. Everyone loves Power HA that uses it, and it does provide that automated failover, which again, very important. I didn't mention also that if you are using, when you purchase a secondary system, especially for IBM I, you must designate it as a capacity backup. That's the CBU option in the configurator. And we do this all the time. What it does is it allows you to take your software, your IBM software, and move it to that second serial number and use it during a planned disaster, or unplanned disaster, I should say. No one plans a disaster, right? You have to understand the network connectivity between the sites. One of the reasons I love working with Racksquared and putting the entirety of a customer's infrastructure at Racksquared is I know the network is tops. The network between the 2 sites is awesome. It's never shaky. It stays up. It's super fast. With customers, in the middle of nowhere, perhaps it's who knows what we're going to get. We get 30 megs sometimes. 30 megs. How do you deal with 30 megs between sites? You better have a real low bandwidth application or use advanced functions from IBM SANs to deal with it. So that's important. And then lastly, the very last thing, which is probably one of the most important things, is the services to stitch this all together. At Mapsys, we have a group of 10 engineers or so that can arrive on site and have helped Racksquared, of course, that can stitch this stuff together and even do some knowledge transfer and teach the customer how to use it. But again, customer needs to want to do this. They need to have an interest in it, and they should actually spend some time and evaluate this and learn how this new feature and function, the DR function, works. So they'll be there. It'll be there for them when they need it. And as Josh always says, test, test, test. So I don't know, Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, one of the things, a lot of this from the DR stance we just mentioned here revolves around replication. One thing I always want to make sure people understand is replication is not always the answer to everything. Replication is great if you lose a site. Replication is great if again, disaster regional issues along those lines. It's great. The problem you run into is, I accidentally deleted a file. Well, Mimics or the SAN or that will have a beautiful copy of a deleted file on the other SAN. Those types of scenarios you always want to plan for is have the versioning in consideration too. You might go, well, hey, we don't have the budget, and go back to, I need dual SANs, dual head units, go back to the dual locations and all those. Well, you can always look at your reservation outside of, using a service provider versus buying additional hardware. But you just got to consider in those scenarios, what is your cost availability to you that you can handle, take on? Having a system that can recover in minutes or hours may still benefit you, and might go, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, if my box is burned to ground, IBM, I got a warrant, I got my insurance company warranty, I can go 2 weeks. That's fine. I'll get on and restore. But also, you got to make sure your backups, are they still in the same building where the building might have burned down to? How are you getting those offsite? So always just keep in the back of your mind, though, backups are just as important as replication. Replication is great for that rapid recovery in terms of, again, hard failures.
Yeah, that's a good point, Josh. With cybernetic VTLs that you folks use and the IBM tape, you guys can have lots of options for backup for these folks.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So let's flip the script here, Josh, from I want to go buy hardware to I want to get out of the hardware business. I want someone to do this for me. You know what we build our services around. Can you share, what should people look for in a service provider if they want a service provider to do this for them?
Yeah, one thing I always say what I do for a living, I get to play with toys. I come from multifaceted, get to play with different technologies. And, when you get an expertise, myself and my team come in here, I get from the complete expert who wants everything, they can handle it all, from the expertise size of a customer down to the make the bad man go away. Anywhere in between. If you needed help, for instance, we assist in, if you needed Intel, a lot of customers we have, for instance, some sort of x86 application sitting in front of their 400 web front end, we can help with that. Unix, you have AIX systems out there, definitely do that. Networking, help you stand up VPNs, help for a plan for DNS changes, firewall access. The other thing I always like to make sure is with expertise, if going with that, is availability. When can they start? Is another one. When you declare a disaster, always look at the terms and conditions of your contract to make sure you find out that I declared a disaster. Guess what? We'll get an engineer on you in the next 5 days. That may not be acceptable. That may be acceptable for you. In our case, no, we typically drop what we're doing and help out customers immediately to make sure that they're functioning, get them back up and recovery. Next thing is technology. How are you going to recover? A lot of customers can come to us and look at different technologies. We have ones, again, as for instance, a cybernetics VTL. They replicate their VTLs to us. From that stance, we actually have their tapes on site already, the virtual tapes, to be able to recover. Other customers, we send physical tapes, and we recover monthly. We have various technologies in here to help out. So when you're looking, find out is what you're doing, is it going to work for that team or company? You find out you're running 5.3. Do they support an old version? There's possibilities in contracts where we do set that up, very old operating systems, or at least try to re-platform you on a newer operating system. Are they capable of doing that? We have the team to help you out. And in an environment, the RPs always love about this is, again, at the end of the day, some customers just, again, want it completely in the cloud environment. We handle the environment. We make sure, again, the halon's inspected, air conditioning's up and running, network connectivity is a fully redundant, managed, monitored, and all that. We can handle that for you as well. Also, I enjoy working with the customers as well, discussing, how are you going to connect to our environment? That's there, again, I always keep bringing up these things, from disaster stance. How are you going to get to your disaster recovery site? We have the environment here to make it redundant, to ensure that you have that connectivity.
Thanks, Josh. So a couple months ago, DJ and I did a webinar with IBM. It was an IBM webinar on storage. And during that webinar, we were talking about the storage infrastructure that we have at Racksquared. And we got into talking, we've got multiple SANs, they replicate between each other, all the things we do to protect data. And while it was actually during the prep for this event, I had a bit of an epiphany around data, that when you think about DR, when you think about, whatever's going on in your environment, you can recover from anything except for the loss of your data. When the data is gone, it's gone. It's you might be able to recreate pieces of it, but when the data is gone, it's gone. So one of the most critical things as you think about DR is, protecting your data, getting a copy off site, having it available to recover from. And there's several ways that you can go about doing that. Josh, I know we support, multiple approaches from different customers. Can you talk about, kick us off talking about, tape? What do we do with tape? How do we recover?
Yeah, recovering from tape, a lot of things what we can end up doing for customers is, with our VTL process, sometimes we digitize their tapes and convert them to virtual tapes and start restoring the systems through the cybernetics if it's a physical tape. Those are usually the slower process. The pros, I still think there's a place in the world for tape today. Thinking about that, tape it's cheap, it works. But there's also issues to consider. While we can handle and ingest tapes, but I find customers run into issues with tape, mainly around human error, logistics. A lot of times, if people forget to load them in the wrong order, you may be in a situation where you're going to use a single tape that may not apply to you, but there are some that have to use multiples. And again, they forget, mess things up. Again, restore times are usually about 4 times longer. But again, that cost may meet your DR needs. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that you have another option. But again, also, if you're only using tape, is that your only backup? You want to try to get at least, 2 copies of your backup, get one at least off site and maybe keep one available if you need that quicker restore time. But hopefully, again, the tapes are popped out, set right on top of the server.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about tape. Tape is not dead yet. It probably will never die. It's the cheapest media on the planet. But I think the thing I want to hammer home here is that when you want to migrate your entire infrastructure to Racksquared, guess what? They support tape. Unbelievable. I know that you actually send a tape and they'll plunk your architecture down right in their data center and you're good to go. So, that's pretty great.
Yeah, one neat thing about that, DJ, is we have customers who are, for instance, using replication software to us, and we are backing up the replica box. So they don't have to handle backups on their production system anymore. We're doing it all on the back end as they're replicating that data to our VTL. And some go, hey, we still have compliance. We need a physical tape. Oh, or a month, we spin them off a tape and mail them the tape to them. That way they have it and they're off and running. So it also meets their compliancy as well.
That VTL option is pretty slick. It really is. Again, cybernetics VTLs, a lot of customers will decide, hey, I can't afford a full Power HA DR craziness, but I can afford a cybernetics VTL sitting in my production site that replicates to my favorite cloud provider, Racksquared. So I think that, again, that's another very valuable and viable solution for disaster recovery for customers that just, again, the cost is a mountain for them, and they just need something that's going to fit in their budget. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, one thing we do with our cybernetics customers that I love is the fact that, maybe they can't afford to, or maybe they just have a single building. Well, that VTL, can replicate to one of our VTLs to get that secondary copy off site. And guess what? If you ever need it back, of course, it can replicate the other direction, bring them back to you. And in the event of a disaster, in some cases, we use those copies to, again, restore you, bring you back up. Another thing, DJ, I want to talk about is, when in terms of disaster recovery and tools, is the SAN. And one of my favorite tools, I'll be honest with you, from a recovery stance. Now, this doesn't help us for versioning or ransomware. If it gets encrypted, the data's gone if you're not doing immutable snapshots on your SAN. But SAN-to-SAN replication is one of the fastest ways I can bring up an iSeries in a different building. When we do SAN-to-SAN replication, if the building was just to be gone, we could power up that because we send them across in consistent groups, and usually around about 5-10 seconds at most between the data loss in between them. But it comes up, complains for a minute, going, hey, someone didn't shut me down properly. We power it on, get them up and running again. I really love that feature of the SAN. The other thing I love about the SAN is when we work with our customers in testing with them. They want to go like, hey, we're on 7.3, we want to try to go 7.5. What does that look like? I go, you know what? We don't have to upgrade your production. You got one box? What we'll do is we'll take a snapshot of your environment, bring it up in a different IP subnet, isolate it, however you wish to do it. We can apply the patch, upgrade, any type of conversion you wish to do, application. We've done it all. Go through that. I love the SAN. But again, SAN is not to replace versioning.
Yeah, good. No, I'm glad you brought that up too. I love the SAN too, and I think a lot of the customers out there that may be listening might say, well, gee, I'm on IBM I and I'm using internal disk, and if you are, that's great, fantastic. But there are quite a few customers out there now purchasing SANs for IBM I. In fact, I'd say it's probably better than 90% of those IBM I customers are now realizing the benefits of SAN: reliability, availability, serviceability, performance, you name it. And the fact that you guys use it, I think, speaks volumes. But not only that, the SAN and indeed your VTL environment provide really advanced functions for AIX, Linux on Power, and IBM I AS400, such as immutability. So some of the newer features in IBM SANs with the safeguarded flash copy, and again, the cybernetics VTL, provide immutable copies should there be a cyber attack, and that would allow for rapid recovery of their data and their business onto the infrastructure, and away they go. They're back in business again. And if you're not using that, you could get into trouble. And it's really good to see that you folks at Racksquared are using that. I think it's really, really important, and you're really covering the bases, I think, for your customers and keeping them alive. Now, I'll tell you this, some IBM I customers are probably scratching their heads, like, what are you talking about? What cyber attack? We've never had a virus on our platform ever. And that's fair. That's a fair point. But you know what? You don't want to be the first customer that finds it. That's all I'll say. Yes, it's a little bit of fun, but let's keep you all safe using these advanced technologies. And again, you guys do an awesome job doing that.
So Josh, we've talked about various approaches to protecting data, various price points for these. From your perspective, is there an option here that's better than the others?
When I get asked this question, if I'm looking at tape, VTL, and SAN, I always like to consider the fact that you have to look at it that each of them are a tool on their own, and they all have their place. And depending on what you're trying to do is the best of those options. None of them are better than the other. None of them are worse than the other, depending on the application. VTL, again, while that is fast, recover and restore, I love VTL. It's great. But from a cost perspective, say you're required to keep, 10 years of dailies or something like that. Eventually, you want to spin off the tape to save some capacity on that VTL, and it may make more sense. If you have a VTL off-site, but again, VTL to VTL replication, think about the 3-2-1 rule. Do you want to have the same media? When he talks about backups in that case. With this, tape is great for a long historical archive. If you're required to keep, your annual backups on that, do you really want on VTL? And I think about SAN replication, and I go, SAN is great, but SAN is not a backup product. SAN is great for recovery in terms of SAN to SAN replication, but you also have to take in consider of versioning. And some, I know, do this. You can take a SAN and you do snapshots of your data on a daily basis. I mean, that's plausible and capable. But if you're required to be able to do file level restores, that may not be an option for your eye. So just things to consider with each of these tools, that one's not better. It's just got to meet your business needs.
Good explanation. So we've addressed your data, the critical piece. You've got your data offsite. Now, as you're planning for your recovery, where do you restore to? What do you need to think about in terms of where I'm going to restore?
Yeah, one of the things I always think of considering is if, again, a lot of people use old hardware. You keep it in the same rack. If you have a water leak in the ceiling and destroys everything in the same room, or a frozen pipe burst, or somebody decides to turn off the halon system and bring down the power to the building, having that geographic, difference, somewhere at different locations, possibly different power grids if possible, some sort of difference between the two locations. If you're based in Miami and you're replicating in Miami and go, oh yeah, you're just looking to get it. If a hurricane comes through there, odds are it's going to hit the north and south side of Miami. You don't want to be in those situations where your DR plan is right up the street. Now, again, always look at cost and availability. If you can't do it, well, look at the next stream. Can I get my tapes to a company like, for instance, I'm not pick your brand of offsite tape storage. Do you have it somewhere secure that you can get those tapes back and recover to? So think about that. Think about power, internet. Again, I bring up, if you're in the same geographic city or location, and there's a huge issue with, like, again, power outage or a regional internet outage, is your both plans in the same area that could cause your problem? Just something to consider.
Yeah, good point. I think a lot of customers ask me about where to put this stuff, and they always mention, "Hey, can I use my older Power 8 box?" Well, first off, if you folks out there haven't heard, Power 8 is just about done, right? They're fast approaching to the end of the service extension, at least through IBM, and then it's done. And And if you're looking for some good points, hey, it's paid for, I suppose, and that's good. But you're still going to be stuck with all the problems that you have with older hardware, where that is, it's out of support, or it's rapidly approaching out of support. It can't support the latest OSs anymore. Where do you put it? On secondary site, is it far enough apart? Like Josh mentioned, is it different parts of Florida? That's probably not the best place for your DR box, right? You want to keep it much farther away than on the Floridian Peninsula. What about some license issues? I talked to you about the capacity backup designation. You will need to add that, or you should add that if you are going to use that as a secondary box. So I can certainly understand how all this can be, again, a little bit overwhelming for some folks. There's some good for it, right? Paid for, bad for it, not, all those other things I had just mentioned. If I were to give you a piece of advice, I'd say maybe don't worry about the older piece of hardware. Maybe use, again, Racksquared as a good DR target. And I think you guys do a wonderful job for customers that really need that. And you allow for all the DR expertise and savings, if you can somehow get away from using that older hardware, for sure.
Yeah, one thing to think about, you bring up like cloud infrastructure. A lot of things we do for our customers, it's many combinations of possibilities, from complete cold to complete hot. Thinking from the cold, someone might come and go, I would like to have reserved hardware. Come into us and go, yeah, we can do that for you. Have reserved hardware. What does that mean? You want to go back to, well, in the event that you need it, we can turn on a box, restore it, get you up and running, but we have a place of CPU and memory guaranteed for you in the event of a disaster. Your cold environment. Even in those, I was bring back test. Even though it's cold, we can still bring it up hot to make sure it all works and you can communicate with it. That's always important to make sure, even if it's cold, I push people to want to test. Then there's also like the warm. Customers come into us, get pre-configured. We build out the partition. It's up and running. Maybe they send us a tape once a month. We restore the tape. It's just kind of sitting there, and they hope that they don't have to recover so much. Again, it's there. Licensing is covered on our part. You don't have to get the CBU box, because all the IBM pieces are on our part now. Third-party applications and all that, you got to make sure, again, transferable, or getting these temp licenses in the event of disaster for third-party applications. But from the stance of IBM, you're covered. Then you get down to the HA. Think about we use iRocket and cybernetics and a couple other ways to replicate people's data to us, that we're constantly either restoring or replicating data to us. So from an HA environment, the box is up and functioning. And both the warm and hot assessments, when you guys build out something like that, you have access to those partitions to be able to get into them, actually see them. They're sitting there just chugging along, ready to go hot when you want. Many options.
Yeah, a lot of options. And you folks really do tailor a lot of the options to what customers can afford, which, Josh, I got to tell you, I really like. I mean, you hit on a lot of it there, right? What happens if a customer wants to replicate their data up to Racksquared, but you know what? They cannot afford the reservation of hardware in case of a DR. Well, you can accommodate them. That doesn't mean they're going to get DR hardware if half the country has a DR event at the same time, but on the best effort scenario, and they bring their credit card, you'll do as much as you can for them, right?
Yeah, that's the flexibility is one of the things that, if you haven't heard a scenario that fits exactly what your business need is or what your budget is, we really try to get creative with customers. I tell people, we're not a complete custom shop. We won't build anything you want. But if you look at the technologies we support and the expertise we have, we're going to work within that framework to try to develop a solution that fits for customers. Part of our HA platform and how we provision that to customers is we do it with a combination of active infrastructure and reserved infrastructure. So if your system needs 0.8 of a processor, the HA system doesn't need to sit there running 0.8 of a processor all the time. We can run that system with 0.2 of a processor, so you pay for that, and then you pay a much smaller fee to have a reservation for that additional 0.6 in the event of an emergency. So there's a lot of creative ways to make DR cost effective. DJ talked some about I guess both DJ and Josh talked about VTL and the expense of purchasing two. we've gone even a step further, with kind of VTL as a service, that we have customers that they want to get away from the capital expense model. So we are purchasing the VTL, we are provisioning it on their site, and they pay a monthly service fee for the hardware, to replicate the hardware to us, and all of the ongoing support and maintenance of that box. So it takes that upfront capital expense and allows you to turn it into an operating expense that you pay for it over time. And at the point at which you've used it and that hardware is no longer viable, which is years down the road, it can be swapped out with a newer model. So there's a lot of flexibility there for how we deploy and design solutions. One of the other things, we get this on occasion, is, well, I mean, you guys are in the business of doing this, of providing cloud services to customers. So what if I don't have a DR plan at all? What if I just call you and say, I'm in a bad way, can you help me? And the answer is, well, we'll help you. But what you're asking at that point is, I don't have a relationship with you. We don't have anything, we haven't worked together for years. We don't really know much about each other, but I'd like you to drop everything you're doing and pay attention to me. And you've got all these other customers. We've got these customers that we do have long-term relationships with. And when you come in that emergency mode, you're asking, drop all those people that have a long-term relationship with you and help me. And, we've done it. We've got customers that we've jumped through hoops. At the end of the day, we're not looking to punish you because you didn't have a DR plan in place. But you just have to realize that there may be things that have to be finished up before we can start that, versus being able to just drop everything and say, let's get these guys back up and running quickly. One of the things,
I've seen you folks do that too. It's been great. I know the two customers are still very appreciative and still current customers of Racksquared.
It certainly creates a long-term relationship when you bail someone out at that point. In the webinar resources, there is a client story in there about a customer. You talk about old OS, you talk about old hardware. Their DR plan, they had extended support, and when it didn't come through on the Power 7, waiting days and days and days for hardware to show up, they came to us. We had them back up in less than 36 hours with multiple OS upgrades. So check out those resources. If you haven't looked at those, there's a bunch of good resources there. So, so with that, we still have a little bit of time to do some Q&A, and some questions have come in. Quickly, again, on the resources, a few things that are out there if you weren't here when we started. There is a executive guide out there on iCloud hosting. Why might you want to do that? There's a brand new executive guide. We just started using this in the last 60 days on, what do I need to do to develop a DR plan, things that I should think about, and then some client stories. So several great resources there that you can look at and learn a little bit more. But let's jump into a few of the questions. One of the questions here is cybernetics related, and it is from an OS standpoint. Is this going to work with AIX, or is this strictly an iSeries? So if I'm not running iSeries, does it work with AIX?
The cybernetics VTL, and I'm speaking this from experience, we use it on our iSeries. We use it with Veeam. We use it with Tivoli Storage Manager, which is, I think, now Spectrum Protect. Correct me if I'm wrong, DJ. They keep rebranding it. It's still TSM to me.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
So one of these, yes, you can carve it up. It's a really neat platform where pretty much you're emulating, IBM tape libraries and all that. The operating system doesn't know any better. It's pretty slick, and like I said, and you can do this all in the same VTL. And you can replicate subsets of it. You can carve it up into multiple virtual tape libraries. There's a lot of neat features you can do with the cybernetics VTL that I do enjoy. So yes, you could definitely use it more than just iSeries. And I'm with you. If you have a tool and you have extra resources, I'm first want to go back. I don't know, let's make up something to use it for. So yeah.
And it's also surprisingly affordable. Same with IBM tape. They're both wonderful options, and they will not break the bank.
Great. Next one is talking colocation. Do you provide colocation of block device systems? I want to activate my environment at time of DR event or test. Don't want to be running a full LPAR, just want to ensure that block level replication of my data is there and I can activate it when I need it.
Absolutely. Depending on your footprint, it may come back and go, I've got a single U, 4U, or half a rack SAN, and go, this block storage device, I'm replicating my data offsite. I need to have available for me. You may want to rent by the U. You may want to rent space by the rack. But yes, absolutely. We have a combination of both. Customers, I'll be honest with you, renting rack space to have area to just dump their data to, I just need this one server and this one attached DASD, SAN, fiber channel, whichever you wish, to get them up and running. Matter of fact, we even have customers down to where they send us a head unit and we are the storage on the back end to do all the SAN replication. All they show us up with their own iSeries and all that, put a fiber channel card in the back, and we do that too. So depending on what type of block storage device you have, we can also provide a front end if you need it, if you don't bring your own. So yeah, many options there.
Yeah. Going back to the comments earlier about utilizing old hardware, we see that a lot. Customers that when they buy the Power 10, they may not have really outdated Power 7 that their DR plan. They now have a Power 9, and they want to know what to do with it. We do have customers that rotate the last generation through our data center. So when they bought the 9, they put the 8 in co-location, and it became their DR location. When they bought the 10, they got rid of the 8, they rotated the 9 in, and they just keep one generation back, and now they have it offsite. It's running, and then you get into all the scenarios of, are you replicating via VTL? Are you sending us a tape periodically? Are you bringing a tape in if you're local? There's all kinds of things that customers will do to utilize that co-location space and that old hardware to create a DR situation. So there's a number of ways that co-location can be used as part of your DR plan.
Another thing to add to that, Jason, I don't want to make sure we forget, is we also have customers who put their production box in our colo, but then they replicate to our hardware at another location. So not only sometimes it's in their building, sometimes they're in our building, their own hardware, but they're replicating to our hardware. There's so many combinations we can do with this. So it's never ending. It's just one of those things. Ask if it's possible. Yeah. It probably is. It's just what's the combination? Like I said, each customer is like a fingerprint. They're all unique.
Yeah. How about when we start looking at DR solutions in the data center? Who handles the licensing of the IBM I, Power, HA? Can I bring my own?
With in our environment, if you're on our hardware, the licensing already exists. We have, with how IBM licenses isn't proprietary to us, with our CPU boxes and our production boxes, they're licensed to cover just about anything you need IBM-wise. You might find the one-offs, ask us. But you cannot bring your license and mixed licensing on the same hardware from an IBM stance. You may come back and go, well, I got this Oracle database. Well, Oracle on their hand, or pick your other application, is totally different scenario where you could bring your third-party app and put it on the operating system. If you have your own hardware and you have your own licensing, yes, we get customers who show up with their own hardware and go, we want to own the hardware, but we want you guys to take care of it. We just don't even touch it. We hook it up to our HMCs, we manage it, do all those pieces too. Another facet, but mixing IBM licensing on same serial number, as I sit here today, is a no. Talk to IBM. Yeah.
We can certainly help you with all that licensing transfer part as well. And we work hand in hand with Racksquared to do that. So.
Great, thanks. With that, we are approaching the end of our hour. I would like to take the chance to just thank everybody for joining. Try to get to everybody's questions. There are a few left that we will follow up offline to make sure you get the answers to your questions. Having heard various options, you've got a hardware guy here in DJ. You've got cloud people here, full service in Josh and I. If one of those solutions, is resonating with you and you would like to bounce ideas, have additional conversation, reach out to us at I think the contact information is going to get you to Racksquared. If you're looking for hardware, I'll help get you in touch with DJ. But between the three of us and our teams, we can work through your specific business need and come up with a solution that's gonna meet exactly what you're looking for. So thank you for joining. Appreciate your time, and hope to hear from you. And good luck to you. Hopefully you have a DR plan that you never have to use.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Janine.
I, too, want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, but I also want to thank Jason, Josh, and DJ for sharing their expertise with us today. Later this week, watch for a follow-up email. It will contain a link to the recording of today's event that you can share with your colleagues. Get all the latest on all things tech by going to techchannel.com/subscribe. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.